Puzzles tend to rear their head from time to time across every genre line. Survival horror, action-adventure, RPG, even the occasional first-person shooter. They're everywhere, but no matter what type of game they appear in, they often have a pretty big flaw. If you've ever been stuck on a puzzle, you might be aware that there are actually two different mentalities that can help you solve it. The first is to take everything you've learned about the game world and try to apply its rules in a logical fashion. Often, earlier challenges will establish principles you can use to overcome later ones. This line of thought should always be enough to get you through, but occasionally, for whatever reason, even if the solution is completely logical, the answer might just elude you. When that happens, a second line of inquiry can start rattling around in your brain. Instead of thinking about the game world itself, it's often easier to ask yourself what the designer expects of you. Over time, the language of game design becomes more and more embedded in our minds, to the point where we can work out what to do just by placing ourselves in the shoes of the designer. If a certain approach seems too good to be true, it probably is. No matter how useless something might appear at a glance, it's probably there for a reason. If you're doing it right, you probably won't have to do anything particularly skill-intensive. These rules are common, and internalizing them, along with many more specific ones, will save you a lot of hassle in the long run. There's a certain satisfaction in being able to smoothly traverse challenges that stump less experienced players, but whatever enjoyment there is to be gained by that is at least cancelled out by using this method of reasoning. Recognizing and exploiting common design patterns just isn't fun in the same way that actually solving a puzzle is. Unfortunately, the really insidious thing about this predicament is that there's no way to flip the switch off. Once you start understanding how games are generally structured, your mind will default to the path of least resistance. Over time, you might even start to feel that the joy has been sucked out of puzzle solving entirely. If anything I just said resonated with you on any level, then this video, and more importantly these games, are for you. Developer Zachtronics have been at the forefront of a rare breed of puzzle games which I like to call problem-solving games. So far they've had 5 commercial releases in this style, and they're all worth playing. They are, in release order, SpaceChem, Infinifactory, TIS-100, Shenzhen.io, and Opus Magnum. Each game is completely unrelated in terms of setting and story, so it's not necessary to play them chronologically. Infinifactory is the most accessible and also one of the easiest, which makes it a great place to start. Infinifactory is a game about building things, only you can't make them directly, you have to put together a factory which then creates the items for you. The goal is to take some cubes and assemble them into something useful. You might get a few separate blocks and be tasked with making an L shape like this. To do it, you put down some conveyor belts and a few welders. The blocks travel down the conveyors, get welded together, and end up as a completed product. It sounds simple, and it is, for a while. As you make progress, you get more tools, and you're tasked with building more and more complicated objects. Over the course of a playthrough, you learn how to use your tools more effectively, and end up making things which seemed impossibly difficult at first. I'll explain why this makes for incredibly satisfying gameplay in a few minutes, but first I think it's important to address the crucial problem these games face. They look incredibly intimidating. Rest assured, if the main thing stopping you from trying them is that they look too confusing, you're missing out for no good reason. To show you how true this is, we're going to do a free walkthrough of the Infinifactory tutorial to see how easy it is. We now go live to me in the studio. Hello ladies and gentlemen. Here I am in the Infinifactory tutorial. I'm going to take you through it just to show how easy the game starts out. So I considered skipping this part, but I kind of want to show that the game is so friendly it even shows you, or gives you a chance to get acclimated to the first person controls. So you can see the old WASD down there at the bottom of the screen, just telling you how to move around. There was a little mouse prompt a second ago that just tells you to look around. So even if you've never played a first-person game before, you can go ahead and play it no problem. Here we come to the first room, so it's just telling us that we can put down blocks. If I left-click, we get a block down. If I right-click, it'll delete them. And they just go wherever you're pointing. This game, Infinifactory, gets its name from Infiniminer, which Zach also made. So it works pretty much the same way. You just click wherever you want to place a block or delete them, you know, just line of sight like that. Nothing to it. We're flying along. Alright. We're actually about to literally be flying along now. You have a jetpack which you can use to move around freely to allow you to see your factory from any angle. So you can press space to go up, control to go down, and there's no limit on this. This just allows you to see everything, so you can get into all the little corners you want to get into and get a good angle on things, get a good overview. You're not limited on that at all. So you can move around freely. You can just think of yourself like a ghost or something. Now here we come to the first factory, if you could even call it that. And the only thing we can do in this room is press the OR button, so I'll just do that now. Start and stop the factory. Presume you can read. If you can't, you might want to start out with a different game. And yeah, you can see that the blocks come out and go into the hologram, which is the goal of the game. The hologram counts down from 10, and when it gets to 0, the door opens. This is just basically what you're doing. It changes from level to level. You have to make different shapes. You know, you got to put the blocks together in some way. But that is, in a nutshell, that's the goal right there. If we come into the next room, it's the exact same as before, but there's no conveyors. Luckily we have some, so we can just put them down like so. And let's just start that up again, see what happens. Well, we already know what's going to happen. There we go, they're counting down. I hope I'm getting it across. The thing I really want to get across is just that it's not as difficult as you think. It's not as scary as you might think. One problem these games sort of have is that they, you know, when someone gets really into them and really appreciates them, they tend to work their way through the game and get to the harder levels, and, you know, they rise to the challenge and beat the harder stuff. And they want to show the game off at its best. So they're going to show you the later levels, which are a bit more sprawling than this and more complicated and interesting. And it's good. It's good that people appreciate the game that way. That's a great thing. But it has the side effect of scaring people away, I think, anyway. Because it really makes the game look very intimidating. You look at it and you think, there's no way I can do that. And one thing I want to tell you is that actually, if you play these games and get into them, like I'm speaking from experience here, having beaten some of the later levels of Infinite Factory, if you come back to them later, you will think to yourself, how did I ever do that? So you kind of wonder. It's a funny feeling that you kind of have to experience for yourself. Sometimes you are impressed by your own ability to have solved the problems in the game if you just take a break from it. And I think the fact that that can happen just goes to show how scary it can be for someone maybe like you who has never played it. So don't worry if you think, I could never do something like that just looks way too complex for me. Don't worry about it. The game starts out, it's nice and easy. It does a lot to ease you in, which is why it's kind of a shame that it does get a scary reputation online thanks to, you know, all the other stuff people share. The thing I like about this tutorial, by the way, is that it's introducing one new mechanic at a time, one and only one. So we didn't even have to, in the last room, all we had to do was just run the factory. And now in this one, we have to just go one extra step, just put the blocks down yourself. Now we'll see it's going to build on that. We're just going to have to take one more step this time. Here we have our block coming out of the wall here, and there's a wall in the way this time. So like the thing down the bottom of the screen is telling us, we can rotate blocks now. So if I just rotate, you can also click and drag to make a row all at once. Nice, easy and intuitive. And rotate and do that. Now, we know what's going to happen now. Blocks are going to come out, and they're going to go around the obstacle and into the goal. There's nothing to it. Nothing to it. Now, obviously, it's going to get harder from here. That's kind of the point, is to give you a good base to build from and make more interesting stuff. But it doesn't go from 0 to 60 right away. It's a gradual increase. I think to show that off, what I'm going to do is next I will show the first proper level, which is still kind of a tutorial anyway, but I'll cut over to that now. Alright, here we are in the first actual level. We're going to give this a go now. This time the difference is that we have 3 blocks, but it looks relatively easy, so let's get started. We'll just throw this block in here, like so. That looks fine. Well, seems easy. We'll just do this. This one should come in here. But, uh-oh. Yeah, that doesn't look right. So, this block is wrong. It's the wrong type of block going in there. Which is interesting. Now, it looks like this block here, which is filled in, has to go over here. and this block has to go here. And if we stop and think about it, there's a way we can do this relatively easily. So there's some space before this block has to come down. If I do this, and I do this, this block is going to come along here, fall down here, and go in there, which is fine. And there's a little bit of room here to move this block. We'll take this one out here. Do it this way. And we can drop it in like so. So that one's going to travel along there, fall down there, and go in. Now they should all end up in the right position now. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, it looks good. So you can see even here, this one isn't a huge jump up. All it is really teaching us, because we're still kind of in the tutorial stages at this point. It's teaching us to use the verticality of the game, because it's a fully 3D game, you know. Use the verticality so that we can have some conveyor belts overlapping with each other like this. So these ones can go over here and this one over here. That way we can just move the objects around a little more cleanly and easily get them to where they need to go. No problem. Now, my advice to anybody starting out, there's a crucial piece of advice, I would say, which the game actually has this as one of its tool tips. It says something along the lines of, it's more important to get a solution working than to make it look good or make it optimized or anything like that. And I want to echo that very strongly. The point of the game isn't to just come up with some brilliant solution right away. The best thing that you can do whenever you come up against a new level is just to try it out. Just go for it, see what happens. You know, when you start working on it and start gradually chipping away at it, you'll realize you're getting there. The game has little tutorial pictures that it shows you, and my advice again would just be replicate whatever's on the picture and just see what it does. You'll see them in some of the levels. Replicate the picture, see what it does, and go from there. And don't be intimidated too much. It's really not that bad at all. So that's my advice for you. I think you can do it. I believe in you. They're really not as difficult as they seem. You will have to use your brain, you know, especially on the later levels, but it's very enjoyable. Once you get into it, it's just such an enjoyable thing to do. And especially if you like this game, you have 4 other Zachtronics games to get through after it as well, and they're all good. So yeah, it's a great experience. I highly recommend it. Now I think that I've said my piece. It's time to go back to stuffy Analysis Matthew in his little booth a couple of days ago when he recorded all the other crap. So enjoy that. I'm out. As you can see, you're not expected to start making massive contraptions right away, and even something like this, as complicated as it might appear, actually isn't as difficult to build as you probably think. This machine does lots of different things, but it wasn't conceived all at once. It came together by focusing on one problem at a time. To start with, you know that some blocks need to be a certain shape, so you isolate those ones and weld them together. All of a sudden, you're a lot closer to the goal than when you started. Now you can stop and reassess. Step by step by step, the problem slowly but surely gets whittled down until you finally push the completed product out the other end. This ability to solve complex problems by breaking them down into smaller parts is exactly the reason we, as a species, went from smashing rocks to smashing atoms. It should come as no surprise that exercising such a crucial part of our brains makes us feel good. Now, I won't lie, being intimidated by a new puzzle never completely goes away, but hopefully over time you'll come to see that as part of the appeal. The amount of satisfaction you get from solving a problem is proportional to how difficult it seemed at first. If a certain puzzle seems impossibly difficult, then when you finally complete it, you almost get to feel like you accomplished the impossible. The best part of all is that these games are so open-ended, guessing the developer's intentions is rarely useful. Each level can be solved in a huge number of ways, so many that it's entirely possible some of the later ones have never been solved the exact same way by 2 independent players. It's just you and the challenge at hand. Developer logic is completely removed from the equation. As if that wasn't enough, there's one last cherry on top. Not only are these puzzles fun to solve, many of them are fun to solve repeatedly. Because there's so many different ways of doing things, some solutions will be faster than others, some will use fewer blocks, and some will take up less space. If you like, you can go back to your previous one and tweak them to make them faster, smaller, or just all around better. Finish a stage once, and your factory might be a clunky, lumbering mess of a thing. Return to it with fresh eyes, and you might be able to make an elegant, well-oiled machine. You then get the satisfaction of watching it do its own thing, and even proudly show it off to other people who smile and nod politely as if they know what's going on. They may not care, but I do, and you will. There are a few better feelings on offer. Alright, time for some practical information. If I've managed to pique your interest about these games, Infinifactory is almost certainly the best place to start. The premise of building factories is pretty intuitive, it has a great tutorial, and it's also on the lower end of the difficulty spectrum for the most part. If you'd prefer to start somewhere else, Opus Magnum is the next best choice. In this one you use robotic arms to perform alchemy. Of these 5 games, this one is the easiest to complete, but it's a little less intuitive than Infinifactory at the very start. It might take a little while before it starts to click with you, but once it does, it's smooth sailing from there. If this one appeals to you more than Infinifactory, feel free to try it first, but just be aware it might be a little more taxing to begin with. After that, SpaceChem is the next best choice. The scientific theme on this one might look off-putting, but you don't have to have any knowledge whatsoever of chemistry to enjoy it. To steal a quote from myself, you can enjoy this game even if you've never so much as glanced at a periodic table, so don't be put off. It's as much a game about chemistry as Tetris is a game about Russia. This one is also less intuitive than Infinifactory, and it ramps up in difficulty faster. It's probably best to start with one of the other two first. Lastly, there's TIS 100 and Shenzhen IO, which are both games about programming. If you're a programmer already, feel free to leap right into these ones, but otherwise it's best to save them until you've tackled at least one of the others. Either way, I recommend starting with TIS before Shenzhen, since it builds upon some features of TIS. These two have a manual instead of a tutorial, which makes them more difficult to get started with. Speaking as a programmer, I can't say exactly how easy or difficult it is to get into both of these games with no programming knowledge whatsoever, but if you've played the other games, at least some of what you've learned in those will be applicable here. The premise is actually pretty similar to the others, it's just that you're moving values around instead of blocks. You should also be aware that Zachtronics released a bunch of Flash games before any of the ones I've talked about, but don't think you can just try those out like a free demo. They're interesting games in their own right, but the lack of polish and poor tutorials make for a bad introduction. You're much better off starting with one of the ones I've featured in this video. Finally, a word of warning. Statistically speaking, you're not going to be willing or able to completely finish most of these games. Considering how much I tried to reassure you of their friendliness, that might sound like a contradiction, but it's not. The later levels do become very difficult, but there's many hours of enjoyable gameplay leading up to that point. If it helps you feel any better, Zach, as in the Zach part of Zachtronics, hasn't beaten many of the bonus puzzles either. The same goes for me and many hardcore fans. The really difficult stuff is there for the people who want it. For everyone else, there's still more than enough to make it worth your while. It would be a lie to say that these games are for everyone, but they're more welcoming and enjoyable than you might imagine. If I've been able to intrigue you or set you at ease at all, then you really owe it to yourself to give one of them a try. I can't promise you'll have a good time, but it's a gamble worth taking because if it clicks, it might just blow you away. In case you need a little extra kick, my next 5 reviews will be on these games. Worst case scenario, at least you end up with some more videos to watch.